The mahogany conference table stretched like an accusatory finger down the center of Sterling and Associates' executive boardroom, its polished surface reflecting the tension that crackled through the Manhattan skyscraper's 32nd floor. Madison Clearwater clutched her presentation materials against her chest, her knuckles white beneath perfectly manicured nails that betrayed none of the anxiety coursing through her veins. "Sit in the back, you worthless trainee." Derek Holloway's voice sliced through the morning air like a blade dipped in condescension. His steel-gray eyes never lifted from his iPhone as he dismissed her with a casual wave of his manicured hand. "This discussion is for actual professionals." The words hit Madison like a physical blow, her breath catching in her throat as 12 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Heat flooded her cheeks, but she forced herself to maintain composure, her Wharton MBA and 5 years of exceptional performance reviews suddenly feeling as substantial as tissue paper. The expensive fabric of her navy Armani suit felt suffocating as she gathered her materials with trembling fingers. "But Derek, I prepared the quarterly analysis you requested," she managed, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning through her chest. "The presentation on emerging market opportunities. Did I ask for your input?" Derek's tone could have frozen the Hudson River. He finally looked up, his perfectly styled blonde hair catching the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park. "When I need something from you, I'll ask. Until then, observe and learn from your superiors." Eleanor Vasquez, the firm's recently retired senior partner who still attended board meetings as an advisor, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Her dark eyes, sharp despite her 73 years, tracked Madison's forced retreat to the back corner of the room. Eleanor's weathered hands clenched around her coffee cup as she watched this talented young woman, whose innovative strategies had quietly generated millions for the firm, being treated like an unwanted intern. Madison settled into the corner chair, her heart hammering against her ribs as Derek launched into his presentation. The slides looked familiar, too familiar. Her breath caught as she recognized her own analysis, her carefully crafted market projections, her innovative risk assessment models, all bearing Derek's name and signature style. "Our emerging markets division has identified several high-yield opportunities," Derek announced to the captivated board members, his confidence radiating through the room like expensive cologne. "Through careful analysis and innovative modeling techniques, we've positioned ourselves to capitalize on currency fluctuations in Southeast Asia." Madison's fingernails dug into her palms as she listened to Derek present her work, word for word, to the senior partners. Her breathing became shallow, each stolen sentence feeling like another layer of her professional identity being stripped away. The months of late nights, the countless spreadsheets, the brilliant insights that had kept her at her desk until dawn, all of it now flowing from Derek's mouth as if it had sprung from his mind. Senior partner William Sterling nodded approvingly, his silver mustache twitching with interest. "Impressive work, Derek. This kind of innovative thinking is exactly what our clients expect from Sterling and Associates." "Thank you, sir," Derek replied smoothly, his smile never wavering. "I believe this positions us perfectly for the third quarter expansion." Eleanor's eyes found Madison's across the room, and in that moment of shared understanding, something passed between the two women. Eleanor had built her career fighting similar battles, breaking through glass ceilings when women in finance were barely tolerated. She recognized the particular brand of sophisticated cruelty that Derek wielded, the kind that left no bruises but could destroy careers with surgical precision. As the meeting concluded and the board members began filing out, their conversations filled with praise for Derek's brilliant analysis, Madison remained frozen in her corner chair, the weight of injustice pressed down on her shoulders like a lead blanket, making even the simple act of standing feel overwhelming. Eleanor approached slowly, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. She had watched Derek systematically undermine talented employees for months, but this display of theft and humiliation crossed every line of professional ethics she held sacred. "Madison," Eleanor said quietly, settling into the chair beside her, "that was your work he just presented, wasn't it?" Madison's eyes filled with tears that she refused to let fall. "Every slide," she whispered. "Every projection, every model. I've been working on that analysis for 3 months." Eleanor's jaw tightened, deep lines etching themselves around her eyes. 37 years I've been in this business, and I've seen many talented people destroyed by predators like Derek Holloway. Her voice carried the weight of hard-won experience. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Madison's hands trembled as she stared at her computer screen the following morning. The familiar hum of Sterling and Associates' trading floor, providing a soundtrack to her growing revelation. Coffee cooled in her mug while she scrolled through Derek's recent presentations to the senior partners, each slide confirming her worst fears. 3 months of her innovative work on emerging markets. Her revolutionary risk assessment algorithms, her carefully crafted investment strategies, all bearing Derek's electronic signature and presented as his original thinking. The elevator dinged behind her, and she quickly minimized the window as footsteps approached her cubicle. Marcus Chen from the compliance department appeared at her desk, his usually calm demeanor marked by an unusual tension that made his dark eyes appear almost black. "Madison, do you have a moment?" Marcus kept his voice low, glancing around the open-plan office where analysts hunched over multiple monitors, their keyboards clicking like digital rainfall. "I need to discuss some irregularities I've noticed." She gestured to the empty chair beside her desk, noting how Marcus's typically immaculate tie sat slightly askew, a detail that would have been imperceptible to anyone who hadn't worked alongside him for 2 years. His methodical nature and quiet integrity had always impressed her, though she'd never imagined they might become allies in exposing corruption. "I've been reviewing quarterly reports for compliance," Marcus began, pulling out a tablet and swiping to a spreadsheet filled with numbers that made Madison's head spin. "Derek's client accounts show some concerning patterns, large transfers that don't align with documented investment strategies, gains that seem mathematically improbable given market conditions." Madison leaned closer, catching a hint of Marcus's cologne, something clean and understated that matched his personality. "What kind of patterns?" "Money moving through offshore accounts, returns that are too consistent to be legitimate, client statements that don't match our internal records." Marcus pointed to several highlighted cells. Either Derek has discovered the secret to beating market volatility, or he's manipulating numbers to hide something significant. The implications hit Madison like a physical blow. Derek wasn't just stealing credit for her work. He was potentially embezzling client funds. Her stomach churned as she thought about the elderly investors who trusted Sterling and Associates with their retirement savings, the pension funds that relied on their expertise to secure thousands of workers' futures. "Have you reported this?" she asked, though something in Marcus's expression already told her the answer. "I tried to raise concerns with my supervisor, but Derek has friends in high places. My boss suggested I might be misinterpreting routine transactions and advised me to focus on other accounts." Marcus's fingers tightened around his tablet. "But I've been doing compliance for 8 years. Madison, I know the difference between routine and suspicious." Across the floor, Derek's voice boomed with laughter as he regaled a group of junior analysts with some story about his weekend in the Hamptons. His tailored Italian suit and gold Rolex caught the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, every inch of his appearance designed to project success and authority. The sight of him made Madison's skin crawl. "There's something else," she said quietly, pulling up the presentation files she'd been reviewing. "Derek has been presenting my work as his own. The emerging markets analysis he showed the board yesterday. I created every algorithm, every projection, every recommendation." Marcus studied the files, his analytical mind quickly recognizing the sophisticated modeling techniques that were Madison's signature. "This is intellectual property theft on a massive scale, combined with the financial irregularities." He paused, the full scope of Derek's misconduct becoming clear. "Madison, we're talking about potential criminal fraud." Eleanor Vasquez appeared at Madison's cubicle as if summoned by their conversation, her presence commanding immediate attention. Despite her recent retirement from active partnership, her silver hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and her navy St. John suit spoke of decades of success in a male-dominated industry. "I couldn't help but notice you two deep in discussion," Eleanor said, settling into another chair with the fluid grace of someone comfortable in any boardroom. "And after yesterday's performance, I thought we might need to have a conversation." Madison felt a flush of embarrassment remembering Derek's public humiliation, but Eleanor's kind eyes held no judgment, only the fierce protectiveness of a mentor who had fought similar battles throughout her career. "Derek Holloway has been undermining talented employees for too long," Eleanor continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had helped build Sterling and Associates into one of Manhattan's most respected investment firms. "But what I witnessed yesterday crossed every line of professional decency." Marcus leaned forward, his compliance training kicking into high gear. "If we're going to address this, we need to be systematic. Document everything, establish timelines, create an evidentiary trail that can't be dismissed or explained away." The three of them sat in contemplative silence, the weight of their decision hanging in the air like expensive perfume. Around them, the trading floor continued its relentless pace, but Madison felt as if she were existing in a bubble of determination and fear. "He's counting on our silence," Eleanor said finally. "Men like Derek thrive because good people are afraid to speak up, afraid to risk their careers for principles. But sometimes, the risk of staying silent is far greater than the risk of standing up." Madison's phone buzzed with a text message, Derek's name appearing on her screen with instructions to prepare another market analysis by end of day. The casual arrogance of his demands, knowing she would comply rather than face his wrath, suddenly felt unbearable. "What do we do?" she asked, looking between Eleanor's experienced wisdom and Marcus's methodical expertise. Eleanor's smile was sharp as a blade. "We fight back carefully, systematically, and with enough evidence to ensure Derek Holloway never hurts another employee again." Madison's apartment in the Upper West Side felt like a sanctuary as she spread documents across her dining room table, the late evening light casting long shadows through her windows. Empty Chinese takeout containers sat forgotten beside stacks of printed emails, performance reviews, and financial reports that painted a damning picture of Derek's systematic abuse of power. Her hands shook slightly as she opened the folder containing her official performance evaluations, documents she had never seen until Eleanor had helped her request copies from HR that afternoon. Each quarterly review told a story of manipulation so sophisticated it was almost artistic in its cruelty. "Employee shows promise but lacks initiative," Derek had written in her Q1 review. Despite Madison having proposed 3 successful investment strategies that quarter, requires constant supervision and struggles with complex analytical tasks. This about a woman who had graduated summa cum laude from Wharton and whose risk assessment models had become the firm's standard practice. The most infuriating entry came from Q3. "Madison demonstrates inconsistent performance and may benefit from additional training in basic financial modeling." This review had been submitted the same week. Derek presented her emerging markets analysis to the board of directors as his own breakthrough insight. Her laptop chimed with an encrypted message from Marcus, who had spent the evening diving deeper into Derek's client accounts. The accompanying spreadsheet made her stomach drop to her feet. Transfers totaling nearly $2 million had moved through a complex network of offshore accounts, all bearing Derek's electronic authorization but lacking proper documentation or client consent. Madison printed the files and added them to her growing collection of evidence, her dining room beginning to resemble a detective's incident room. Photographs from her phone showed timestamps of her original work files, proving she had created the analyses months before Derek presented them. Email chains revealed his pattern of requesting her input on projects, only to submit them under his name. Bank records suggested financial crimes that could result in decades of prison time. Her phone rang, Eleanor's contact photo appearing on her screen, a professional headshot that captured both the kindness and steel in her mentor's eyes. "How are you holding up, dear?" Eleanor's voice carried genuine concern alongside her characteristic determination. Madison sank into her leather armchair, exhaustion weighing down her limbs like lead. "I never realized how systematic it was. Reading these performance reviews, he's been building a case against my competence while simultaneously stealing my work to advance his own career. Derek Holloway is not the first predator I've encountered in this business," Eleanor replied, her tone carrying 37 years of hard-won experience. "I've watched men like him destroy promising careers through precisely this kind of calculated undermining. They identify threats to their advancement and neutralize them through bureaucratic warfare." Madison thought about her female colleagues who had left Sterling and Associates over the past 2 years. Brilliant women who had cited cultural fit issues or limited advancement opportunities in their exit interviews. How many of them had faced Derek's systematic sabotage? "Eleanor, how did you survive it? When you were climbing the ladder, dealing with men who wanted to keep you down, A long pause filled with the distant sounds of Manhattan traffic when Eleanor spoke again. Her voice carried the weight of battles fought and scars earned. I learned that sometimes the only way to defeat a bully is to expose them so completely that they can never recover their credibility. But it requires courage, Madison, and it requires allies. The next morning brought a development that changed everything. Madison arrived at the office to find Derek in animated conversation with William Sterling himself, their heads bent over a tablet displaying what appeared to be financial projections. Derek's body language radiated confidence and satisfaction, his expensive suit and perfect smile painting him as the picture of successful ambition. "Madison," Derek called out as she passed, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "Perfect timing. I was just showing Mr. Sterling the innovative portfolio optimization strategy I've developed for our high-net-worth clients." Madison's blood turned to ice as she recognized her own work on the tablet screen. 6 weeks of late nights developing a revolutionary approach to risk-adjusted returns that could transform how the firm managed wealthy clients' investments. Her sophisticated algorithms, her careful market analysis, her breakthrough insights into behavioral finance, all presented as Derek's latest masterstroke. "Remarkable work," William Sterling commented, his silver mustache twitching with approval. "This kind of innovation is exactly why our clients trust us with their most important financial decisions." Derek preened under the praise, his chest swelling with borrowed accomplishments. "Thank you, sir. I believe this positions us perfectly for the upcoming client review season." Madison felt the familiar heat of humiliation rising in her cheeks, but this time it was accompanied by something else, a cold, calculating anger that settled in her chest like a shard of ice. Derek had grown so comfortable with his theft that he no longer bothered to hide it, stealing her work in broad daylight with the confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. As William Sterling walked away, praising Derek's innovative thinking, Madison made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to Eleanor and Marcus. "Emergency meeting, conference room C, 1 hour." Derek noticed her phone activity and approached with the predatory smile she had learned to fear. "Madison, I hope you're taking notes on how real innovation is presented to senior leadership. Perhaps someday you'll develop the strategic thinking necessary for client-facing work." She met his gaze steadily, surprising herself with her calm. "Oh, I'm learning a great deal about strategy." "Derek, more than you might imagine." Something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps even fear. But it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Derek straightened his already perfect tie and walked away, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floor with the rhythm of impending downfall. The evidence spread across conference room C's polished table told a story of corruption so comprehensive it took Madison's breath away. Marcus had arrived early, his usually pristine appearance slightly disheveled from a sleepless night spent tracing Derek's financial manipulations through labyrinthine offshore accounts. Eleanor sat across from them, her weathered hands steady as she reviewed documents that could destroy Derek's career and potentially send him to federal prison. "The embezzlement is more extensive than we initially suspected," Marcus began, his compliance officer training evident in his methodical presentation. "Derek has been skimming from client accounts for at least 18 months, using sophisticated transfer protocols to hide the theft. Conservative estimates put the total at $3.2 million. Madison felt sick. These weren't abstract numbers on a spreadsheet. They represented real people's life savings, retirement funds, college tuition accounts. Families who trusted Sterling and Associates to protect their financial futures had been systematically robbed by someone they'd never even met. Eleanor studied the bank statements with the keen eye of someone who had spent decades identifying financial irregularities. The sophistication suggests Derek has been planning this for years. These aren't crimes of opportunity. They're the work of someone who understood our systems well enough to exploit them systematically. "There's something else," Madison said quietly, pulling out her laptop and connecting it to the room's presentation screen. "I've been tracking every piece of my work that Derek has stolen over the past 2 years. Portfolio strategies, risk assessment models, client presentation materials, market analysis reports. He's built his entire reputation on intellectual property theft." The screen filled with a side-by-side comparison that made the theft undeniable. Madison's original files, complete with timestamps and creation metadata, displayed alongside Derek's presentations to senior partners. The dates told the story clearly. Madison's innovations preceded Derek's breakthroughs by weeks or sometimes months. "This is career-destroying evidence," Eleanor observed, her voice carrying grim satisfaction. "But Derek has protection from senior management. My sources suggest he's been sharing profits from his embezzlement with at least one board member, possibly more." Marcus leaned back in his chair, the weight of their situation settling over him like a heavy blanket. Going through normal channels is useless. Derek's supervisor, the compliance board, even HR, they've all been compromised or intimidated into silence. Madison stared out the conference room windows at the Manhattan skyline, where other ambitious professionals were climbing their own career ladders. Hopefully with more integrity than Derek Holloway. The injustice burned in her chest like acid. But beneath the anger, something else was growing. A cold determination that surprised her with its intensity. "What about the shareholders' assembly?" she asked suddenly, turning back to her allies. "It's in 3 weeks, public forum, all the senior partners, external auditors, even some major investors attend." Eleanor's eyes lit up with understanding. "A public presentation of evidence that can't be suppressed or dismissed. Brilliant." She paused, studying Madison's face. "But it would require you to stand up in front of everyone, including Derek, and make accusations that could end your career if you can't prove them absolutely." "The evidence is solid," Marcus interjected, his analytical mind already working through the possibilities. "Financial records, metadata from stolen files, performance reviews that contradict documented achievements. It's prosecutor-level material." Madison felt her heart hammering against her ribs as the magnitude of what they were contemplating settled over her. Standing up to Derek in a private conference room felt terrifying enough. Exposing him publicly to the firm's most powerful stakeholders would require courage she wasn't sure she possessed. "He's counting on our fear," Eleanor said softly, as if reading Madison's thoughts. "Men like Derek survive because good people are afraid to risk everything for what's right. But sometimes, Madison, the greatest risk is staying silent." A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Through the conference room's glass walls, Madison could see Derek approaching with his characteristic predatory smile, his expensive suit and perfect grooming making him look like a magazine advertisement for success. Marcus quickly closed his laptop, while Eleanor gathered the most damaging documents into her briefcase with practiced efficiency. Madison forced her expression into neutral professionalism as Derek opened the door without waiting for permission. "Well, well," Derek drawled, his eyes scanning the room with obvious suspicion. "Emergency meeting. I hope there's nothing wrong with any of our projects, Madison. You know how concerned I am about your performance issues." The condescension in his voice made Madison's skin crawl, but she met his gaze steadily. "Just reviewing quarterly targets with Eleanor and Marcus, making sure all our documentation is properly aligned." Derek's smile never wavered, but something dangerous flickered in his steel-gray eyes. "Documentation, how thorough of you." He stepped further into the room, his presence making the air feel thick and oppressive. "I trust you're all keeping the firm's best interests in mind." "Always," Eleanor replied smoothly, her decades of experience allowing her to match Derek's superficial pleasantries while radiating subtle menace. After all, integrity is what separates Sterling and Associates from our competitors. The word integrity hung in the air like a challenge. Derek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his smile remained perfectly in place. "Indeed, well, don't let me interrupt your documentation review." As Derek left, closing the door with deliberate care, the three allies sat in tense silence. Madison realized her hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline flooding her system as the reality of their situation crystallized. "He knows," she whispered. "Derek knows we're investigating him." Eleanor's expression hardened with determination. "Then we'd better move fast. We have 3 weeks to build an airtight case that will destroy him completely. Because now it's war." Madison's fingers flew across her keyboard in the pre-dawn darkness of her office, the familiar weight of exhaustion pressing behind her eyes as she compiled evidence that could either vindicate her career or destroy it entirely. The trading floor lay empty around her, its usual chaos replaced by the cathedral-like silence that only existed in Manhattan's financial district before sunrise. Her computer screen glowed with bank statements that told stories of systematic theft, client portfolios manipulated with surgical precision, and offshore accounts that existed solely to launder Derek's embezzled millions. Marcus had spent the weekend tracing financial breadcrumbs through a maze of shell companies and foreign banks, each discovery more damning than the last. The elevator dinged softly behind her, and Madison's heart jumped before she recognized Eleanor's familiar silhouette emerging from the shadows. Her mentor carried 2 steaming cups of coffee and the determined expression of someone who had spent 40 years fighting similar battles in conference rooms across Wall Street. "Couldn't sleep either?" Eleanor asked, settling into the chair beside Madison's desk with the fluid grace of someone comfortable in any environment. Madison accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling its rich aroma while her eyes remained fixed on the evidence that could either liberate her or end her career. "I keep thinking about all the other employees Derek has destroyed over the years. The women who left, the men who were passed over for promotion, the clients who trusted him with their life savings." Eleanor studied the documents spread across Madison's desk, her weathered hands steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. "I've been making some calls to former colleagues who worked with Derek at previous firms. The patterns are identical: systematic undermining of talented subordinates, intellectual property theft, and financial irregularities that were always explained away by his connections and charisma. How many others, Eleanor? How many careers has he destroyed while we were all too afraid to speak up?" "Too many," Eleanor replied simply. "But today, we change that." Madison's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Marcus, who had been working through the night to verify their most explosive discovery. Derek hadn't just been embezzling from random clients. He had specifically targeted elderly widows and recent retirees, people who trusted their financial advisors implicitly and rarely questioned investment statements. The cruelty was breathtaking in its calculation. Derek had identified the most vulnerable clients, people who depended entirely on their investment returns for basic living expenses, and systematically robbed them, while presenting himself as their trusted protector. Madison thought about her own grandmother, who had worked as a secretary for 40 years to save enough for retirement, and felt rage crystallize in her chest like ice. "Madison," Eleanor said softly, noting the change in her expression, "I need you to understand what we're risking. Derek has allies among the senior partners, people who have been complicit in his schemes either actively or through willful blindness. They'll fight back with everything they have." Madison met her mentor's eyes, seeing decades of similar battles reflected in their depths. "What would you do, Eleanor, if you were in my position with this evidence at this moment in your career?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving to the windows where dawn was beginning to paint the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and amber. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "I would remember that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite the fear. I would think about all the people Derek will hurt if we stay silent, and I would trust that sometimes doing the right thing is the only choice that lets you sleep at night." The trading floor began filling with early arrivals, analysts and junior associates clutching coffee cups and preparing for another day in Manhattan's financial machine. Madison watched them through her cubicle's glass partitions, wondering how many had their own Derek Holloways to navigate. How many brilliant careers were being quietly sabotaged by predators who understood that good people's tendency toward self-doubt could be weaponized. Derek's arrival announced itself through the usual parade of sycophantic greetings from colleagues who mistook fear for respect. His voice boomed across the floor as he regaled a group of junior analysts with another story about his weekend in the Hamptons, his gold Rolex catching the morning light as he gestured expansively. Madison felt her stomach clench as Derek's eyes found hers across the crowded floor. His smile was perfectly calibrated, warm enough to appear friendly to observers, cold enough to remind her of her place in his carefully constructed hierarchy of power. "Madison," Derek called out, his voice carrying clearly across the trading floor. "Perfect timing. I need you to prepare a comprehensive analysis of our Asian markets portfolio by this afternoon. Make sure it's thorough. I'm presenting to the board tomorrow." The casual arrogance of his demand, knowing she would recognize her own future work being stolen before it was even created, felt like a slap across her face. But this time, instead of the familiar flush of humiliation, Madison felt something else. A cold, calculating satisfaction. "Of course, Derek," she replied, her voice steady and professional. "I'll make sure it's exactly what you deserve." Something flickered in Derek's eyes. Confusion, perhaps even unease. But he recovered quickly, straightening his already perfect tie and moving on to terrorize other subordinates. Eleanor watched the exchange with the sharp attention of someone who had survived similar predators through 4 decades of professional warfare. "He has no idea what's coming," she murmured with grim satisfaction. Madison pulled up the shareholders' assembly agenda on her computer screen, studying the schedule that would either vindicate everything she had worked for or destroy her career entirely. In 2.5 weeks, she would stand before the most powerful people in Manhattan's financial community and expose Derek Holloway's crimes to the world. "Eleanor," she said quietly, "what if they don't believe us? What if Derek's allies are too powerful, or the evidence isn't enough, or then we'll have fought the good fight?" Eleanor interrupted gently. "And sometimes, Madison, that's enough. Sometimes the act of standing up to injustice is more important than the outcome." Madison stared at her reflection in her computer screen, seeing not the humiliated subordinate Derek wanted her to believe she was, but a Harvard MBA with 5 years of exceptional performance who had created innovations that generated millions for Sterling and Associates. In 2.5 weeks, Derek Holloway would discover exactly who he had been underestimating. The war room that Conference Room CE had become reflected the intensity of their mission, its walls now covered with financial flowcharts, timeline analyses, and photographic evidence that painted Derek's crimes in stark detail. Madison stood before a whiteboard covered in her precise handwriting, connecting threads of corruption that stretched back 3 years and touched dozens of clients and colleagues. Marcus had arrived with dark circles under his eyes, but carrying a tablet filled with breakthrough discoveries that could seal Derek's fate. His usual calm demeanor was replaced by something sharper, the focused intensity of someone who had spent his career protecting investors from exactly this kind of predatory behavior. "The pension fund theft is worse than we thought," Marcus began, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Derek has been systematically skimming from the Teachers' Retirement Association account, people who spent their lives educating children, counting on those investments to fund their golden years." Madison felt physically ill as Marcus displayed the evidence on the room's presentation screen. Hundreds of teachers, coaches, and school administrators had been robbed by someone they'd never met, their modest retirement funds becoming Derek's personal treasury for expensive suits and Hampton weekends. Eleanor studied the financial statements with the analytical precision that had made her Sterling and Associates' most successful partner. "The sophistication is remarkable," she observed grimly. "Derek has been running a parallel accounting system, creating false records that show legitimate investment returns, while the actual funds flow into offshore accounts." Madison traced the connections on her whiteboard, each line representing another layer of Derek's systematic corruption. "He's been using my innovative portfolio strategies to legitimize impossible returns, my risk assessment models, my market analysis techniques. He's weaponized my own work to hide his theft." "There's something else," Marcus said quietly, pulling up a series of emails that made Madison's blood run cold. "Derek has been blackmailing at least 2 senior partners with evidence of their own minor infractions. Nothing criminal, but embarrassing enough to ensure their silence about his activities." The revelation explained Derek's seemingly untouchable status within Sterling and Associates' hierarchy. He hadn't just been stealing money, he had been systematically compromising the firm's leadership structure, creating a web of complicity that protected him from normal oversight. Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text message that made her expression harden like granite. "Derek just scheduled a meeting with William Sterling for this afternoon. The agenda mentions concerns about employee loyalty and potential security breaches." Madison felt ice form in her stomach. Derek wasn't just aware of their investigation, he was actively working to discredit them before they could present their evidence. The shareholders' assembly was still 10 days away, but Derek was already maneuvering to destroy their credibility. "He's going to claim we're disgruntled employees making false accusations," Madison realized, her voice barely above a whisper. "Derek will paint this as workplace jealousy or incompetence, turn our evidence into the ravings of unsuccessful subordinates." Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the windows where Manhattan's financial district bustled with the unconscious energy of markets that never sleep. "We need insurance," he said finally. Evidence so comprehensive that Derek can't explain it away. Documentation so thorough that discrediting us becomes impossible. Eleanor's smile was sharp as a blade. I may have exactly what we need. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number from memory, her expression carrying the confidence of someone about to deploy decades of accumulated influence. Sarah, it's Eleanor Vasquez. I need to call in that favor you owe me. Madison listened as Eleanor arranged a meeting with Sarah Chen, the state attorney general's chief financial crimes prosecutor. The implications hit her like a physical blow. They weren't just fighting for workplace justice anymore. They were building a criminal case that could send Derek to federal prison for decades. Sarah wants to meet tonight, Eleanor announced after ending the call. Off-site, completely confidential. If our evidence is as solid as we believe, the state is prepared to launch a full investigation into Derek's activities. The weight of what they were attempting settled over Madison like a heavy coat. In 10 days, she would stand before Sterling and Associates' most powerful stakeholders and expose Derek's crimes to the world. But now, she realized, she would be doing so not just as an employee seeking justice, but as a witness in what could become one of Manhattan's largest financial fraud cases. Madison, Eleanor said gently, noting the fear in her eyes, you don't have to do this alone. Marcus and I will be right there with you. And now we'll have the State Attorney General's office supporting our investigation. Madison looked around the conference room that had become their command center, seeing evidence of Derek's crimes covering every available surface. Photos of forged documents, copies of stolen intellectual property, bank records showing millions in embezzled funds, all waiting to be presented to a world that had celebrated Derek Holloway as a rising star in Manhattan's financial community. What if I freeze up there? Madison asked quietly. What if Derek's allies attack my credibility? Or I can't explain the technical evidence clearly enough, or then you'll remember every teacher whose retirement fund Derek stole, Eleanor interrupted firmly. Every brilliant woman whose career he destroyed. Every client who trusted him with their life savings. You'll remember that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and standing up anyway. Madison nodded slowly, feeling something shift inside her chest. The frightened subordinate who had endured Derek's humiliation for 2 years was evolving into something harder, more determined. In 10 days, Derek Holloway would discover that he had chosen the wrong target for his systematic cruelty. Marcus returned to his chair, pulling up the final piece of evidence that would complete their case. There's one more thing Derek doesn't know we've discovered, he said with grim satisfaction. He's been planning to disappear. Offshore bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. A private jet chartered for next month. Even property purchases under assumed names. Eleanor's eyes glittered with predatory satisfaction. Derek Holloway thinks he's been playing chess while we're playing checkers. Time to show him exactly who the real strategists are in this game. The pre-dawn silence of Madison's apartment was broken only by the soft clicking of her laptop keys as she rehearsed her presentation for the 1,000th time. Empty coffee cups and takeout containers littered her dining room table, evidence of the sleepless nights that had consumed her life since Eleanor's meeting with the Attorney General's office had transformed their workplace justice mission into a federal criminal investigation. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Derek scheduled another emergency meeting with senior partners. Something spooked him. The timestamp read 4:47 a.m., confirming that none of them had slept as the shareholders' assembly approached with the inevitability of an avalanche. Madison stared at her reflection in her laptop screen, seeing someone she barely recognized. The uncertain analyst who had endured Derek's humiliation had evolved into something harder. A woman who carried evidence of crimes that could topple one of Manhattan's most prestigious investment firms. The transformation felt surreal, as if she were watching someone else's life unfold in cinematic slow motion. Eleanor arrived precisely at dawn, carrying fresh coffee and the determined expression of someone who had spent 4 decades preparing for exactly this kind of battle. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe chignon that emphasized the steel in her eyes, and her Navy St. John suit conveyed authority that Derek's expensive Italian clothing could never match. The State Attorney General's office has everything they need, Eleanor announced, settling into Madison's leather armchair with the fluid grace of someone comfortable in any environment. Derek's accounts are being frozen as we speak, and federal agents are preparing arrest warrants that will be executed immediately after your presentation. The implications hit Madison like a physical blow. In 6 hours, she would stand before Sterling and Associates' most powerful stakeholders and expose Derek's crimes to a world that had celebrated him as a rising star. But now she realized that her words would trigger a cascade of events that would destroy not just Derek's career, but potentially his freedom for decades to come. Eleanor, what if I'm wrong? What if there's some explanation for the evidence that we haven't considered? What if— Madison, Eleanor's voice cut through her spiral of anxiety with gentle firmness. I've been doing this for 40 years. I've seen evidence fabricated, witnesses intimidated, and justice denied to protect powerful men who believe themselves untouchable. What we've assembled isn't speculation or wishful thinking. It's prosecutorial-grade documentation of systematic fraud. Madison pulled up the presentation that would either vindicate her career or destroy it entirely. Slide after slide of financial records, stolen intellectual property, forged documents, and victim impact statements told a story of corruption so comprehensive it took her breath away. Derek hadn't just been stealing money. He had been systematically destroying lives while presenting himself as their protector. Her laptop chimed with an encrypted message from Marcus, who had been monitoring Derek's activities from his compliance office perch. The accompanying surveillance photos made Madison's stomach drop to her feet. Derek was at the office at 5 a.m., feeding documents into an industrial-grade shredder, while his computer screen displayed what appeared to be file deletion protocols. "He's destroying evidence," Madison whispered. Showing Eleanor the photos, Derek knows something's wrong and he's trying to eliminate anything that could incriminate him. Eleanor studied the images with the analytical precision that had made her Sterling and Associates' most successful partner. Too little, too late, we have copies of everything, plus the offshore bank records that he can't access or destroy. Derek's just confirming his guilt. Madison's phone rang, the caller ID showing Sarah Chen from the Attorney General's office. The prosecutor's voice carried the focused intensity of someone who had built her career, destroying financial predators exactly like Derek Holloway. "Madison, we're moving ahead with the arrest warrants. Your presentation this afternoon will provide perfect cover for federal agents to take Derek into custody without alerting his accomplices or giving him time to flee the country." The weight of what she was about to do settled over Madison like lead. In a few hours, she would stand before the most powerful people in Manhattan's financial community and trigger events that would echo through Wall Street for years to come. Derek's arrest would make headlines. Sterling and Associates would face federal investigation, and her name would be forever associated with one of the decade's largest financial fraud cases. "Sarah," Madison said quietly, "what happens after today? To the firm, to the employees, to the clients whose money Derek stole. The stolen funds will be recovered and returned to victims. Sterling and Associates will face scrutiny but likely survive with new leadership. And Derek Holloway will spend the next 20 years in federal prison, which is exactly what he deserves." As Madison prepared to shower and dress for the most important day of her career, Eleanor remained in her living room, staring out at the Manhattan skyline where other ambitious professionals were beginning their morning routines. Some of them, Eleanor knew, were facing their own Derek Holloways, predators who used charisma and institutional protection to systematically destroy anyone who threatened their advancement. "Madison," Eleanor called softly as she headed toward her bedroom, "remember that you're not just fighting for yourself today. You're fighting for every person Derek has hurt, every career he's destroyed, every dream he's stolen. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply refusing to stay silent." Madison nodded, feeling the familiar weight of fear in her chest accompanied by something else, a cold, crystalline determination that surprised her with its intensity. In 4 hours, Derek Holloway would discover exactly what happened when predators chose the wrong target for their systematic cruelty. The Sterling and Associates boardroom had never felt more like a gladiatorial arena. As Madison stood at the presentation lectern, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins like electricity. The mahogany conference table stretched before her like an accusatory finger, surrounded by the most powerful figures in Manhattan's financial community: senior partners, external auditors, major investors, and board members whose decisions could reshape entire markets. Derek sat in his usual position near the head of the table, his expensive Italian suit and gold Rolex projecting the confident success that had protected him for years. His steel-gray eyes radiated the casual arrogance of someone who believed himself untouchable, though Madison noticed a slight tightness around his mouth that suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with this unexpected agenda item. Eleanor occupied her advisor's chair with the regal bearing of someone who had helped build Sterling and Associates into one of Wall Street's most respected firms. Her dark eyes tracked Derek's every movement, while her weathered hands remained perfectly steady on the portfolio of evidence that would destroy his career and freedom. Marcus stood near the room's back wall, his compliance officer credentials giving him legitimate access to observe the proceedings. His tablet contained backup copies of every document they would present, insurance against any last-minute attempts at sabotage or intimidation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Madison began, her voice carrying clearly across the silent boardroom, "I've requested this time to present evidence of systematic financial fraud, intellectual property theft, and embezzlement that has been occurring within our firm for the past 3 years." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Derek's confident expression flickered for just a moment before reasserting itself. Though his fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around his Mont Blanc pen, several board members leaned forward with sharp attention, their analytical minds immediately recognizing the gravity of Madison's opening statement. William Sterling's silver mustache twitched with concern. "Madison, these are extremely serious allegations. I trust you have substantial evidence to support such claims." Madison connected her laptop to the presentation screen, her movements deliberate and confident despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. "I have comprehensive documentation of crimes that total over $4.2 million in embezzled client funds, systematic theft of intellectual property, and manipulation of performance reviews designed to cover up these activities." The first slide appeared on screen, a side-by-side comparison of Madison's original portfolio optimization strategy and Derek's presentation to senior partners 3 weeks later. The timestamps were damning, the content identical down to specific analytical techniques that represented Madison's signature innovations. "This is my emerging markets analysis, created over 6 weeks of research and modeling," Madison explained, her voice steady as granite. "Here is Derek Holloway presenting identical work as his own breakthrough insight, claiming credit for innovations that generated millions in client returns." Derek leaned forward, his voice carrying practiced indignation. "This is outrageous. Madison is clearly a disgruntled employee attempting to sabotage my reputation with fabricated evidence. The work in question represents collaborative efforts that—" "Collaborative," Madison interrupted, advancing to the next slide. "These files contain creation metadata, proving I authored every algorithm, every projection, every analytical framework that you've presented as your original thinking for the past 2 years." The presentation screen filled with technical data that made Derek's plagiarism undeniable. File creation timestamps, edit histories, even the specific modeling software that Madison had used to develop her innovations, all proving that Derek had systematically stolen intellectual property while presenting himself as Sterling and Associates' most innovative analyst. Eleanor watched Derek's face carefully, noting the subtle changes in his expression as the evidence mounted. The confident arrogance was giving way to something else: calculation, perhaps even panic. As he realized the sophistication of the case being built against him, Madison advanced to the financial evidence, her heart hammering as she revealed the offshore accounts, forged documents, and systematic theft that had funded Derek's luxurious lifestyle. Derek has been embezzling from client accounts through a network of shell companies and foreign banks, specifically targeting elderly retirees and pension funds. The boardroom erupted in sharp murmurs as the presentation screen displayed bank statements showing millions of dollars flowing from client investments into Derek's personal accounts. The pension fund theft drew particular outrage. Teachers, firefighters, and public servants who had trusted Sterling and Associates with their modest retirement savings. "This is preposterous," Derek declared, rising from his chair with theatrical indignation. "I'm being framed by a subordinate whose poor performance has been documented in multiple quarterly reviews. These alleged evidence files could have been fabricated by anyone with basic computer skills." Madison smiled coldly, advancing to her final slides. "Speaking of quarterly reviews, let's examine the performance evaluations you've submitted about my work." The presentation screen split to show Derek's scathing assessments, alongside documentation of Madison's actual achievements, innovations that had generated millions for the firm, strategies that had become industry standards, analytical breakthroughs that had positioned Sterling and Associates ahead of their competition. According to your reviews, I'm an incompetent analyst who requires constant supervision and lacks basic financial modeling skills, Madison said, her voice dripping with controlled irony. Yet somehow, this incompetent analyst created every major innovation you've claimed credit for during the same evaluation periods. The contradiction was so stark it left several board members shaking their heads in disgust. Derek's systematic undermining of Madison's career while simultaneously stealing her work revealed a level of calculated cruelty that shocked even Wall Street veterans who had witnessed decades of corporate backstabbing. William Sterling's voice carried cold fury when he spoke. Derek, these allegations are incredibly serious. What's your response to this evidence? Derek straightened his tie with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly, his perfect grooming suddenly appearing artificial under the boardroom's harsh lights. William, I've served this firm with distinction for 5 years. My track record speaks for itself. This appears to be a coordinated attack by disgruntled employees who... The boardroom door opened with precise timing as 2 federal agents entered. Their badges clearly visible and arrest warrant ready. The theater of Derek's defense crumbled instantly as he realized that Madison's presentation hadn't just been about workplace justice. It had been the opening move in a federal criminal investigation. Derek Holloway, the lead agent announced, her voice carrying absolute authority. You're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. As the agents led Derek away in handcuffs, his expensive suit and gold Rolex suddenly looking like costumes from a performance that had finally ended, Madison felt something shift in her chest. The frightened subordinate who had endured his humiliation for years was gone, replaced by someone who had found the courage to stand up against injustice regardless of the personal cost. Eleanor approached the lectern as the boardroom slowly emptied, her eyes shining with pride and vindication. Brilliantly done, Madison. Derek Holloway will never hurt another employee again. Madison nodded, exhaustion and relief flooding through her in equal measure. Justice had been served, but more importantly, she had discovered something about herself that Derek's systematic cruelty could never touch. The strength to fight back when everything she believed in was threatened. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office buzzed with the controlled chaos of a major financial crimes investigation as Madison walked through corridors lined with evidence boxes bearing Sterling and Associates' corporate seal. 3 weeks had passed since Derek's arrest, and the full scope of his criminal enterprise was still being unraveled by teams of federal investigators, forensic accountants, and compliance specialists. Sarah Chen greeted Madison in a conference room overlooking Lower Manhattan's courthouse district, her expression carrying the satisfaction of someone who had built her career, destroying exactly the kind of predator Derek represented. Stacks of documents covered every available surface, creating a paper monument to years of systematic fraud and theft. The final numbers are staggering, Sarah announced, settling into her chair with the fluid efficiency of someone who prosecuted white-collar criminals as a form of public service. Derek embezzled $6.8 million from client accounts, stole intellectual property worth an estimated $15 million in generated revenue, and manipulated performance reviews for at least 47 employees over his 5-year tenure at Sterling and Associates. Madison felt physically ill thinking about the scope of Derek's crimes. 47 careers damaged or destroyed, dozens of clients robbed of their retirement savings, innovations stolen and monetized for personal gain, all while Derek presented himself as a rising star in Manhattan's financial community. What about the other employees he hurt? Madison asked, thinking about the brilliant women who had left Sterling and Associates, citing cultural fit issues that now revealed themselves as systematic persecution. We're reaching out to every former employee whose performance reviews were manipulated by Derek. Several have already come forward with their own evidence of harassment, intellectual property theft, and career sabotage. This case is going to establish precedent for prosecuting workplace predators who use institutional power to commit crimes. Eleanor appeared in the conference room doorway, her presence commanding immediate attention, despite her transition from active partnership to advisory status. Her silver hair was pulled back in the elegant chignon that had become her signature, and her navy saint, John's suit projected the authority of someone who had spent 4 decades fighting similar battles in boardrooms across Wall Street. "Madison, I wanted you to hear this directly from me," Eleanor said, settling into the chair beside her with genuine warmth. "The Sterling and Associates board has voted unanimously to offer you Derek's former position as senior portfolio manager, effective immediately. Additionally, they're implementing new compliance protocols based on your recommendations to prevent this kind of systematic abuse from ever happening again." The promotion felt surreal after years of Derek's attempts to sabotage her career through falsified performance reviews and stolen credit. Madison thought about the humiliated analyst who had been forced to sit in the back during board meetings and marveled at how courage could transform not just individual lives, but entire institutional cultures. "There's something else," Eleanor continued, her expression carrying the mischievous satisfaction of someone about to deliver excellent news. "Marcus Chen has been promoted to Chief Compliance Officer, and his first initiative is establishing a whistleblower protection program that will shield employees who report ethical violations. Your courage has literally rewritten the rules at Sterling and Associates." Madison felt tears threatening as she thought about Marcus's quiet integrity throughout their investigation. His willingness to risk his career to protect investors from exactly the kind of predatory behavior Derek represented. Their professional partnership had evolved into something deeper during their months of collaboration, and she found herself hoping that personal feelings might follow professional respect. Sarah Chen pulled out a tablet displaying Derek's mugshot alongside federal sentencing guidelines that made Madison's breath catch. Derek pled guilty to all charges yesterday. With the amount of money involved and the systematic nature of his crimes, he's looking at 25 to 30 years in federal prison. He'll be 67 years old before he's eligible for parole. The justice felt appropriate but somehow insufficient given the scope of Derek's cruelty. Madison thought about the teachers whose retirement funds he had stolen, the brilliant women whose careers he had destroyed, the clients who had trusted him with their financial futures while he systematically robbed them. "What about restitution?" Madison asked, thinking about the elderly widows and recent retirees who had been specifically targeted by Derek's schemes. "Every stolen dollar will be recovered and returned to victims," Sarah replied, with the confidence of someone who specialized in following money trails through labyrinthine financial structures. "Derek's offshore accounts, his Hampton property, even his collection of expensive cars, everything will be liquidated to compensate the people he hurt." Eleanor's phone buzzed with a message that made her smile with genuine pleasure. "That's William Sterling. The board wants to schedule a press conference announcing the new compliance initiatives and Derek's conviction. They want you to speak about the importance of corporate whistleblowing and ethical leadership." The irony was delicious. Madison would stand in the same boardroom where Derek had humiliated her, this time addressing media representatives and financial industry leaders about the courage required to challenge institutional corruption. The frightened subordinate who had endured systematic abuse had become a symbol of resistance against workplace predators. "Madison," Eleanor said softly, her voice carrying the weight of 4 decades fighting similar battles, "you've accomplished something remarkable. Derek will never hurt another person. Sterling and Associates has been reformed from within, and you've established legal precedent that will protect employees across the financial industry. That's a legacy worth celebrating." Madison looked out the conference room windows at the Manhattan skyline where other ambitious professionals were navigating their own career challenges, hopefully with more integrity than Derek Holloway had ever possessed. Somewhere in those gleaming towers, other potential whistleblowers were probably wrestling with their own decisions about speaking truth to power. Her phone chimed with a text message from Marcus, whose new position as Chief Compliance Officer had already generated invitations to consult with other firms seeking to implement similar ethical safeguards. His message was characteristically brief but carried personal warmth that made her smile. "Dinner tonight. We have a lot to celebrate." Madison felt something shift in her chest as she contemplated the future. Professional advancement earned through merit rather than manipulation. Personal relationships built on mutual respect rather than fear. And the satisfaction of knowing that her courage had prevented Derek from destroying other lives. "Yes," she replied to Marcus, feeling lighter than she had in years. "We definitely have a lot to celebrate." 6 months after Derek Holloway's sentencing, Madison stood in her new corner office overlooking Central Park, the panoramic view serving as a daily reminder of how dramatically her life had changed since finding the courage to challenge institutional corruption. The mahogany desk that had once belonged to Derek himself now supported her own innovations, portfolio strategies and risk assessment models that generated legitimate returns through analytical brilliance rather than criminal theft. Marcus appeared in her doorway carrying 2 cups of coffee and the quiet satisfaction of someone who had found both professional fulfillment and personal happiness in the most unexpected circumstances. His promotion to Chief Compliance Officer had transformed him from behind-the-scenes analyst to industry leader, speaking at conferences about ethical investing and whistleblower protection across Wall Street. The Teachers' Retirement Association sent another thank you letter, Marcus announced, settling into the leather chair across from Madison's desk, with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged in her personal space. Every stolen dollar has been recovered and returned, plus interest compensation for their losses during Derek's embezzlement period. Madison smiled as she read the heartfelt letter from retired educators who had trusted Sterling and Associates with their modest savings. Their gratitude felt more valuable than any bonus or promotion, representing lives protected and financial security restored through the courage to speak truth to power. Eleanor knocked softly on the open door, her presence still commanding attention despite her transition to full retirement from active practice. Her silver hair caught the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and her navy-st John suit conveyed the timeless elegance of someone who had spent 4 decades breaking barriers in male-dominated industries. "I wanted to share some news that I think you'll find gratifying," Eleanor said, settling into the 3rd chair with the fluid grace that had made her a legend among Manhattan's financial elite. Derek's conviction has triggered investigations at 3 other investment firms, where former colleagues noticed similar patterns of employee abuse and financial irregularities. The ripple effects of their courage continued expanding months after Derek's imprisonment, proving that sometimes individual acts of resistance could catalyze systemic change across entire industries. Madison thought about other potential victims being protected by their decision to fight back, rather than suffer in silence. "There's something else," Eleanor continued, her expression carrying mischievous satisfaction. "Harvard Business School wants you to speak at their annual ethics symposium about corporate whistleblowing and moral courage in financial services. They're calling it the Madison Clearwater Lecture on Professional Integrity." The honor felt surreal, given that 18 months earlier, Madison had been enduring daily humiliation from a supervisor who tried to convince her she was incompetent, despite her exceptional qualifications and innovative contributions. Derek's systematic gaslighting had almost succeeded in making her doubt her own capabilities, until courage revealed the truth about both his crimes and her worth. Madison's computer chimed with an encrypted message from Sarah Chen at the district attorney's office, containing an update that made her breath catch. Federal investigators had traced Derek's criminal network to a sophisticated money laundering operation that had been stealing from retirement accounts across multiple states, with Derek serving as a regional coordinator rather than an isolated perpetrator. The FBI estimates that Derek's arrest has disrupted a fraud ring that stole over $40 million from pension funds and individual retirement accounts. Madison read aloud, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Our investigation prevented him from expanding into a national operation that could have affected thousands more victims." Marcus reached across the desk to squeeze her hand, his touch conveying both professional respect and personal affection that had grown from their months of collaboration into something deeper. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on shared values and mutual admiration rather than workplace proximity or convenience. "Madison," Eleanor said softly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had mentored dozens of successful professionals throughout her career, "what you accomplished goes far beyond exposing one criminal. You've proven that individual courage can challenge institutional corruption, that speaking truth to power can protect vulnerable people from predators, and that doing the right thing ultimately leads to both personal and professional fulfillment." Through her office windows, Madison could see the Manhattan skyline where other ambitious professionals were pursuing their careers, hopefully with more integrity than Derek Holloway had ever possessed. Somewhere in those gleaming towers, Other potential whistleblowers were probably wrestling with their own decisions about challenging powerful predators who used institutional protection to commit crimes. Her phone buzzed with a text message from one of Derek's former victims, retired teacher whose pension had been fully restored through the restitution process. The simple words carried profound gratitude. "Thank you for having the courage to speak up. You saved my retirement and probably many others." Heroes come in all forms. Madison felt tears threatening as she considered the journey from humiliated subordinate to respected leader, from victim of systematic abuse to protector of other potential targets. Derek's attempt to destroy her career had ultimately revealed strengths she never knew she possessed, and led to achievements beyond her wildest professional dreams. "Eleanor," Madison said quietly, "what would you have done if you were in my position 18 months ago? Young, relatively powerless, facing someone with institutional protection and the ability to destroy careers." Eleanor was silent for a long moment, her gaze moving to the windows where afternoon light painted the city in shades of gold and possibility. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 4 decades fighting similar battles in conference rooms across Wall Street. "I would have done exactly what you did, gathered evidence, found allies, and fought back with everything I had. Because sometimes, Madison, the greatest victory isn't personal advancement or professional recognition. Sometimes it's simply knowing that you had the courage to protect others when it mattered most." Madison nodded, feeling the deep satisfaction that came from choices made with integrity rather than convenience. Derek Holloway would spend the next quarter century in federal prison, but more importantly, his systematic predation of vulnerable employees and clients had been permanently ended through her willingness to risk everything for justice. Marcus stood to leave for his afternoon compliance meeting, but paused in the doorway with the smile that had become Madison's favorite feature. Warm, genuine, and completely without the calculated manipulation that had characterized Derek's superficial charm. "Dinner tonight?" Marcus asked, his invitation carrying the comfortable intimacy of someone who had become both professional partner and personal anchor. "We're celebrating 6 months since Derek's sentencing, and I have something special planned." Madison felt her heart flutter with anticipation, wondering if Marcus's something special might involve the kind of commitment that would transform their professional partnership into something even more meaningful. The thought of building a life with someone who shared her values and had stood beside her during the most challenging period of her career felt like the perfect culmination of their journey from workplace allies to something deeper.